This is Culture, Communication, and Brand Moments with Shelby Jo Long, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant people on the planet, hear their stories, and get the most important business lessons they have learned on their road to success, and get exclusive advice on how to implement their success into your life and business. Culture, Communication, and Brand Moments is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board and your host, Shelby Jo Long.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast today. I'm Shelby Jo Long. I'm CEO of Business Dynamics and also CEO of Rogue Publishing Partners. Today, I'm excited to have the Rogue directors here to have a discussion for those that are thinking about putting a book together for their business and also just wondering about what that looks as far as time and emotional commitment, because it's a big strain, but also the financial commitment. And we have the opportunity today to hear from three different perspectives within the publishing industry, just to give kind of a background and overview of what it is that I do and what the expectations or what I discovered in the process is that I just published my book here this summer. And when I started writing the book that I envisioned when I started writing is completely different than the book that I ended up with. And I'm very, very happy with where my book ended up. However, the process to go through the writing and the editing and tying all the pieces together in the publishing, and then what I do in helping put it together as a part of your business, all of those things are very much aligned. And as a future author or current author, understanding that commitment is something that is very beneficial before you actually jump into the process. Because your process, you may anticipate that I'm going to write my manuscript in a couple of months, have it edited, and then I'll have it out by next year. And we have to understand that the process might take a little bit longer. So let's start by talking about the writing process. I'm going to ask Scott Sery, the director in the Rogue Publishing, to talk about these different types of commitments in the writing process. Scott, if you can introduce yourself and tell us about your perspective.
Yeah, I'm Scott Sery. I'm the ghostwriter in the group, director of words. Pretty much if you want to write a book, but you don't have the time or the skills to do it, you hire it out to a ghostwriter who can take your thoughts and turn them into a coherent story that is easy to read and fun to read. So the writing obviously comes first. You can't edit a book that hasn't been written yet. And it is the longest process in the whole scope of writing a book. Generally, 50,000 word book, you should probably plan on about 1,000 words per week. So about a year to get it all out, especially if you're using a ghostwriter, because we have to sit down, we have to do interviews, then I have to go back and write it, and then we have to go back and look it over, make sure I wrote what was actually correct in what you were thinking. And there's a lot of back and forth on all of that. So the time aspect is really big. Just even if you're using a ghostwriter or if you're doing it yourself, you can often go faster because you don't have to do those interviews. The difference is, do you have more time or do you have more money? The cost is a large investment. There's the opportunity cost if you're doing it all yourself, or there's upfront monetary cost if you're hiring somebody to do it for you. Even for those that want to write their book themselves, it's sometimes a good investment to hire a ghostwriter or at least a ghost consultant, maybe, just for the emotional investment of the whole book writing process. There's a lot to your story that you don't really realize is in there. And so somebody can come in and the writer can say, no, we need to emphasize this part of it a little bit more. That's way more impactful than this part over here. And so that emotional investment, you might be, as Shelby said, invested in one area, in one story, one topic that you're trying to get across. But then when you consult with people, it actually goes a whole different direction. And it can become much more emotional or much less emotional, just depends on where the book finally ends up. But that investment is probably going to be very different than what you initially started out thinking it would be.
Sure. All of those are really important points. Talking about a consultant or a ghostwriting consultant or a book coach, which we'll hear from Susie here in a little bit, who is a book coach. There is a benefit to having that. And having written my own manuscript, And working with a developmental editor and a proof editor, and we'll hear from the editor next, it's a time commitment, but it's also good to have that accountability partner on the other side of it. If you have a ghostwriter, then yes, you're having meetings and your recordings and you have writing and a lot of feedback back and forth. But then if you decide not to go in the ghostwriter route, it's good to have some sort of accountability structure there to help move you along, because it's an arduous process. It takes a long time, and you have to make the decision to make that time and emotional investment to be able to really dig in. And Scott, I really enjoyed what you talked about the emotional piece too, because when you tell your story, it's hard to tell your story. And you tell it, and you might not be getting the details that are appropriate for your reader, or appropriate, or at least enough for your reader to really make that emotional connection. So I think those are all really good points for potential writers out there. So Jenifer, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the editing process and the commitments that take place in that area?
Yes. Hello, I'm Jenifer Jas. I own Words with Jas, and I head up the editing area of Rogue Publishing Partners. So when clients come to me for editing, there are often expectations in the time involved, the cost involved, and the emotional involvement. And those expectations really run the gamut. They're usually, especially for first-time authors, they often have different expectations than reality, but it really depends on the person. So let's go with the emotional involvement with the editing piece. So working back and forth with an editor, for some people, they just are willing to say, I trust you as a professional, take my words, fix them, send it back to me, and I'm just going to say, hey, that's wonderful, thank you. And then the book moves on toward design and publishing. Other people will want to have meetings and about, specific, even, content changes, wording changes, even comma changes. Please explain why you made this edit to my precious words, and all of those responses are correct. It depends on the person and their involvement with their words and how much they want to be involved in understanding each edit. But for those clients who would like to have a little more hands-on approach and more involvement in the decisions and understanding why, those are the clients that are more emotionally invested in their words and, wanting to make sure that they have the words reflect their perspective, but also that they're going to look at the book later and say, this is all accurate to the way I understand grammar rules as well. So the emotional impact really depends on the person and their personality and, tie in with their words. And then, of course, cost, it's an investment in writing a book and getting it professionally designed, edited, written, published, coached along the way. And so, yeah, that's just a kind of a helping people understand that this is an investment. I mean, how many times have we read business books where people say, I held off on getting a business coach, but then once I did, it cost $14,000 for a business coach, but I decided to, bite the bullet and just do it. And man, did my business really take off after that. So it's the same thing with publishing a book. It's sometimes there's a higher cost than what you expected, but once you do it, you end up with this excellent book that you can really be proud of that can also help your business take off. So those are the two aspects I wanted to primarily touch on for now.
Yeah, two very important things. The editing process, that's really where it's challenging as an author to change. It's not necessarily change direction, but you get kind of married to those words and those phrases, right, and you might not want to change it. But then that's why having somebody involved on the outside as another reader that can really help those ideas come across better. And I would say, particularly about the financial investment, that's probably where you need to think about really making a good investment. Getting a good editor for your book can make the entire difference of the way that you communicate your message. And you should not go cheap in that area for sure, because it can make a real difference in, particularly for your editor, helps you speak to your audience. And if you're a professional and you are using this book as a piece of your business and you're speaking to a professional audience, you can't have something that's going to take away your credibility. So I think that is so important and an important piece of the process and something to build into your budget, and understand that an editor is good and seek out the right editor for each part of your process. So Susie, can you tie up this publishing discussion and introduce yourself and tell us about just generally what we need to think in the publishing process about this investment?
Yeah, so my name's Susie Schaeffer. I'm founder of Finish the Book Publishing, Movie Muse Productions, and the VP of Operations for Rogue. So my job, my role in the publishing arena is really to be your project manager, your Sherpa, your guide, to take you through the entire process, whether you were starting with a ghostwriter or writing it yourself, and find you the right editor, find you the right designer, and bring all those pieces together. When I'm working with a client, really what I'm doing is, as you're going through those various phases, I make the connection so that even when your book is in editing, we can actually be starting to work on cover design. We can start to be working on really fine-tuning your author bio, really making sure that we've got all your back matter, front matter dialed in, setting up your counts, all those kinds of things. So that's really my role, is to make sure that I keep that train moving down the tracks, because if you have this stop-start gap that's happening, it's going to take, usually with that time investment, many months more to actually finish your book. So that's one of my jobs, is to make sure that I make the connection and I keep the process moving to shorten that time investment so that you can actually publish your book quicker. If you use a traditional publisher versus independent publishing, you're looking at a 3-year process. Whereas with independent publishing, depending on whether you're using a ghostwriter or not, your time investment is usually closer to about a year, year and a half. So it really can shorten up that time. And when you're looking at a business book, you want to get that book out faster because it's your marketing tool, right? So that takes me to the next thing. Your financial investment for your book should come out of your business's marketing budget. And the reason I say that is because that book really is a marketing tool. It's like an expanded business card. It's the thing that's going to get you speaking engagements on podcasts, TV shows, radio shows, all those kinds of things. So you want to make sure that the budget for your book is really coming out of your line item for your marketing. Okay, that's really important. And of course, too, there's the emotional investment. You have to understand that when you write a book, it's a journey. And there's a lot of stuff that people uncover about themselves, about their beliefs, their values, all those kinds of things when it comes to their personal life as well as their business, why they do their business, what is the cause that your business and you support. So when you dive into those things, there really can be an emotional investment, not just time and money, but you're putting yourself out there. So you have to kind of wrap your head around that. That's part of the wonderful things that I love about my work with authors, is that, and why I'm called a transformational book coach, is because as you're going through this process, you will mature, you will gain confidence, you will see your whole life and yourself in a different perspective when you're done with your book. And those are some things that really help entrepreneurs as they're publishing their book, because they suddenly realize, hey, I don't have to hide in the shadows. I can tell my story. I can be public about my story. I can own it. And that makes you the business leader and the expert in your field that you were destined to be.
Absolutely, Susie. That's a great things for us to remember, and to also understand it is a time commitment, and having a guide like you can adjust our expectations when we go through the whole process, particularly if we're going from start to finish with a coach and working with so many different people along the way. It's an investment. Just to touch finally on what you were talking about in the end with your book doesn't always have to be a business card for your program, your consulting program, or whatever that is, but it makes a really nice touch to your business, adds that authority and credibility piece. Everything that you talk about telling your story and being more vulnerable, those types of things, that's what I work in the brand space. When you develop a brand and you tell your story, that's when you really start to create the emotional connection with your audience. We talk about these business books that have all these processes in them, and those can get lost really easily. But when you tell your story and you connect that story with the audience, that emotional connection is made. And remember that your consumers are going to connect to your stories rather than your services. If they connect with you on an emotional level, then that leads to return and referral service, and it just helps bring that community together. And it's such an important piece. You don't need a book for your business, but it sure helps with all of those pieces. It helps add the credibility. It also helps get your story out there. In addition to that, challenging to tell it in a very short amount of time. So this allows you to expand on it, and the people that want to know more can know more about you in that way. It's really important to have that as a baseline for your business. I think this is a great discussion today. Thank you, Rogue Directors, for giving us your expertise and your analysis about why we need to think about the process and why we need to be prepared. And also, one of the most important points to come out of this is that as an author, we have to be prepared for the emotional commitment. Telling your story is hard. Being vulnerable is a real challenge. And there's vulnerabilities all across the process of writing, publishing, editing. All of these things are so emotional and connected to your life and your business. And it's a journey, and we have to mentally prepare ourselves for it. Fortunately, there's a whole team of us here to do that. And so we look forward to helping you on your journey of writing your book. Contact Rogue Publishing today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Culture, Communication, and Brand Moments with your host, Shelby Jo Long. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we will see you on the next episode.